what do the commandments and the golden rule do for us? Certainly one thing they do is give a certain order to our lives, which makes it easier for people to live together in communion. Because who wants to live in a community where lying and murder and adultery and envy and lust and stealing, disrespect for parents and elders are commonplace? It'd be a pretty miserable world. There's certainly no peace in living in such a place. Further, to not recognize that there is a God, a just and merciful God who cares for the widow and the orphan, means that people who have a lot of power or wealth can easily think that they're little gods, making themselves the center of things and exploiting others. And further, to have a day devoted to God and family is really important. Because really, in the whole Jewish tradition, certainly among conservative and Orthodox Jews to this day, the Sabbath, having this one day where we're not caught up in business and in consumerism, but where we recognize our need to cultivate a relationship with God and one another, is a very humanizing factor. And as Moses reminds the people in our first reading from Deuteronomy, that if they follow these commandments, they're going to show how wise and intelligent they are, that they're humble enough and smart enough to follow the one true God. Now, what does the golden rule add to the commandments? So to do to others as we want done to us. Well, clearly, most of the commandments are negative things. Don't do this, don't do that, or you're going to hurt others and yourself. So the golden rule is positive. Do to others as we want done to us. So you might tutor another person with some knowledge that you have, helping them to grow. And often, of course, we do that because someone did that for us. It's the whole thing of paying it forward. So St. James, in his letter, from our second reading there, tells us that what God has given us is not simply to be heard and even understood, but we're called to live it out, to be doers of the word. Because a religion or moral code, which is simply in our head, does no one any good. It's a delusion, as he says. That real religion is always put into action, into our lives, especially in caring for others, particularly those who have little or no power. As he says, religion that's pure and undefiled before God and the Father is to care for orphans and widows in their affliction and keep one unstained from the world. So real religion is not just about what we understand, but even more, it's the work of our hearts and our hands. So the commandments help us to avoid evil. The golden rule helps us to do good. But there's a further moral growth that takes us beyond the rules. Because as Jesus says there to the Pharisees in our gospel, that you guys are really good at keeping rules, but what's in your heart? I can act justly, but in my heart, I might despise others. Or I might know what's good, but the rule might keep me from doing what's good. Again, the classic, perhaps, example is, you're married, your wife is pregnant, the water's broke, you got to get her to the hospital, you're speeding, the policeman pulls you over, and he has two choices. He can say, so what, I'm giving you a traffic ticket for speeding. Or he can say, put my blues on, follow me, and we'll race to the hospital. Does he follow the rule, or does he do what's right, what's just? That's the question. Because the wider good can go beyond the simple letter of the law. Because all human, what they call positive law, is always falls short. That's why it continually has to be revised as we see more. Sometimes it's revised for the better, sometimes it's worse, but that's another discussion. Now, so it has to do with what is just. And the virtue of justice is to give to each person what's due to them. The problem is, what's due to each person? Is more due to the person who has more education, or more money, or lives in a better neighborhood, or is a particular ethnic or racial group? Is more due to the person who has powerful friends, important people? Too often in our eyes, our world teaches us that those are supposedly the people who deserve more. But in God's eyes, we're all His children, called to be brothers and sisters to one another. So Jesus was worried not just about some, but he was worried about the salvation of the two being crucified with him, as he was about his friends, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. He was concerned about the 10 lepers as he was about his apostles. He was as concerned about the person caught in adultery as he was about the Pharisee Nicodemus. Each person is important. Each person's dignity needs to be preserved. And it's not based on what we have or what we know or who we are, but it's based on the fact that God has called us into life. Each person is important. So you then have different kinds of justice. One is what they call commutative justice. It governs one-on-one relationships. But what happens when you have one person and the other person represents $1 billion corporation? How will that person, the individual, be treated, even though they're dealing with one other person, but that person is part of a much larger, more powerful organization? I was listening to NPR on my way back to Charlotte, and they were talking about who knew that there was a strike by people who work for Nabisco, Orioles and other kinds of things. And basically what it is people want to have their jobs kept. And Nabisco, even though they made more money last year than the year before, wants to move more of its plants into Mexico and other places because they can pay less. And of course, the other thing is to move, as a lot of corporations have done, break the unions so that they can pay fewer benefits, fewer pensions, etc. Again, we all know this has been happening for quite a while. So, what do you do? How do you do it? So contractual justice often is based on who is more powerful rather than on what is fair, what is just. And again, this is very complicated. I'm not saying I know all the answers. But you then have what's called distributive justice, the justice that governs the way we share in social goods. So it's usually the relationship between the city, the state, the nation, and us, families, individuals, whatever. So how do you share the benefits and the burdens of society? What are you talking about? Taxation, education, distribution of wealth, health, environmental quality, etc. Again, in the first year of the pandemic, the 8 richest people in the United States, their wealth went up by close to $1 trillion. So it basically doubled. Some much less, some went up 3 times, others only about 40%. So $1 trillion. How many of you had your wealth doubled? And yet, at least one of those people pays no taxes. Is that just? Is that real distributive justice? It's a question. So that brings us to social justice, which refers to the common good. How do we structure a world, a nation, a state, a city, that we look for the common good rather than, I want mine, who cares about the other guy? What is it to be a Christian? What is it to follow Jesus? So do we cling to human tradition, what our present society says things should be like, or do we work for the dignity of each and every person? Will we be doers of the word, or simply followers of whatever society we live in? That's the challenge of the gospel.